now tapped in with the introspective father and son duo. Last name may be strange, but never strangers to the game. Adjust the listening devices and keep it loud.
Coming in, flex. I just wanna win, LABB, who we running with, 2233, I'm on 10 again, state your name.
Hello and welcome to another installment of No Strangers to the Game. I'm Ja, and that's Troy. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about being yourself. But first, so I wanted to ask you, how was your week and your Halloween weekend?
My week was pretty interesting. I had some projects working on. I had to clear up some things and make sure that they're ready to go and crossing my T's, dotting my I's. So in some ways, it was a little tense in that regard. As far as the weekend, I didn't do anything regarding Halloween. We did take a trip to your grandmother's in LA, hung out over there for a little bit and, just chilled. So my week was a little tense. Weekend, kind of relaxing, didn't do a whole lot. How about you?
Pretty good. I think my week was busy, but in a good way, as in I was actually getting stuff done. I was moving around, but I got a lot accomplished, so that's good. And I think as we're getting close to the end of the semester, it probably may be more of that, but I guess it's, getting it done. So.
Right. So I know I started a new internship with the NBA, right?
Yeah, tomorrow. First meeting tomorrow. So.
How you feel about that?
I mean, excited, but I think that there is a slight nervousness of like, and that's for me, that's the difficult balance of interning is, hey, you're expected to come in there. You're not expected to know everything. You're expected to come in there, learn, ask questions. But at the same time, you don't want to go in there asking a million questions. They're like, man, we got an intern who don't know nothing. You know what I mean? So I think I'm nervous about that balance of wanting to soak up as much information as it can, but also seeming like I'm competent. But, I'll figure it out as I go.
Man, you'll be all right. You're pretty intelligent, sharp, and figuring out how to adapt to situations. And I think you know a lot more than you probably imagine. The terminology may or may be different, but in terms of kind of what you're doing, I think you'll probably have a pretty good insight and be able to adapt to it. So you should be all right.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. So today we're going to be talking about being yourself. And I know the quote we kind of had was, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. But I really wanted to start off by just really helping our audience and really ourselves understand what does it mean to be yourself? Because I think sometimes being yourself can be blurred because so much of who we are is comprised of the things we've seen since, childhood or since we were born. How do you know when you're being yourself versus, hey, these are things that I've grown up with or that have just been a part of me because of, what I was surrounded by? How do you know when you're truly being yourself?
I think when you truly being yourself, you feel a sense of peace. You feel at ease. You don't go in kind of stressed and you're not always, kind of on edge because you're comfortable in the space that you're in because that's the space you're supposed to be in. That's you being authentic to who you are. Like some people grow up and their parents have these certain expectations for them and the child never fully becomes comfortable with who they are. And they're always on edge and it may lead them to go out and do things that are not to their best interest, whether it be drugs, alcohol, and different type of things that probably shouldn't do. So to me, when you're yourself, you're at peace, you're relaxed and, doesn't mean that you're perfect. It just means that I'm at ease in the situation that I'm in and the space that I'm in. And it's more likely because I'm comfortable with who I am and truly being myself.
I always think about that because, and I don't know why I was just thinking about this at this moment, but Mowgli in the Jungle Book, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was raised by wolves from birth because he got separated from his family or whatever. He was raised by wolves and he grew up, thinking he was a wolf. And it wasn't until he saw something different when he actually saw humans, that came into the jungle where he was like, I'm not a wolf. Things started to kind of get confusing for him. So that leads me to believe how much of who we are is decided by what we see around us.
Well, I think a good portion of it is. I think, probably a majority of that is decided by, what you experience, your surroundings. But there's also that innate thing when, you saw the Mowgli, when he looked and he said, wait a minute, I look more like that than I look like, these lions or these animals that were nurturing me, right?
Yeah.
Even though I'm comfortable here and this is my upbringing, that looks more familiar. That looks more like what I should be doing than what I'm doing. And it may be uncomfortable when you become yourself from being something that you were taught or, that you experienced in your surrounding. So sometimes becoming your true self may be a little bit difficult because you've been taught something other than that. Does that make sense? And then once you begin to move away from that discomfort, you realize, okay, this is the more natural way of doing things. Kind of like when you're in sports, right? If you've been doing something a certain way and it became comfortable, it may not be the correct way to do a jump or run or sprint. In order to break that habit, it becomes uncomfortable, right? Because you're used to doing it a certain way. Didn't mean it was good. It was just the way I did it. And then when you break that habit, it becomes uncomfortable until you begin to do it to the point of, okay, now I feel more natural doing it. So it's breaking that habit or way of doing something, which allows you to become more comfortable in what the way you should be doing something.
And I guess bringing it more back to the real world, another example I have of something like that is I have a few friends that are adopted, right? And they were, let's say, a black kid adopted by two white parents. And so I guess they grow up acting white, whatever that means, but they grow up acting a certain way. And it's, when they come around a different group of people and experience something different, it does kind of throw them into this kind of confusing space of where it's like I look and almost, I guess, innately am more drawn to this group of people, but it's hard to almost completely throw out, all you've known for your entire life. So I can imagine that's got to be tough. And I think that leads me to my next question is there's a process of learning how to be yourself, because I think you know this better than I do, but after you leave your home, right? And obviously you grew up with your mother and father, or, whoever grew up in your household, there's so much that you get from them and you act a certain way around them and it just becomes who you are. But when you go out on your own, you really learn that I can now start to choose who I want to be. How do you, what's the process like of making those choices literally every day of like, this is who I'm going to be now?
Well, you're experiencing that now.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask me. So essentially you say, okay, this is the way I've always done things. This is what has worked for me on one hand. And maybe this over here, I haven't had as good experiences. So I may try something different and say, okay, I can do whatever this task is or exercise a certain way other than the way I was taught at home. I can cook chicken differently than what my mom taught me. You know, it may or may not be better, but I can experiment and get the chance to see, okay, well, mom's way was probably better way of doing it than the way I do it, or what have you. So it's that experimental stage where you begin to find yourself. You're taught and you're given a set of rules and guidelines by your parents or whoever who brings you and rears you. But you also have to figure out, where am I most comfortable? Because and not just being comfortable for the sake of being comfortable, but comfortable in a sense of who I am and what works for me so that I can truly be authentic to myself.
It's funny because when you talked about doing things the way, mom did it or whatever, mom always, I always knew how to do laundry. I knew how to do it, but I only knew how to do it the way mom did because that's how she taught me and that's all she wanted me to do in her home. So when I moved out and I started doing laundry by myself, I was like, I'm the type of person that I don't believe it until you prove it to me. So
yeah, I know that.
So I remember one time I was doing laundry and I'm like, why do we separate the clothes? Why do we need to get them in different groups of color? So I was like, I'm gonna wash my white clothes with my colored clothes. I was like, I wanted them to be white, so I threw some bleach in there and my white clothes came out pink. I said, okay, well, that's why we do that. So I think that's a funny story about talking about like the experimental stage. I think some people actually end up going back to what, they knew because it's either comfortable or find out it just made sense.
Yeah, well, you find out sometimes. I was to say you're gonna learn the lesson. You can learn it the easy way by me telling you and go out there and figure it out on your own. But you'll figure it out and you'll get some clarity sooner or later.
But there are things that I think you like. we grew up doing because, like I said, our parents or whoever raised you just kind of enforced that. And then as you move away, you may say that, that's not the best way of doing it, or that don't even make sense. One thing that always stuck out to me, as I know you remember this. I remember Granny and even Mom kind of had it a little bit. It was like, you don't sweep outside. You don't sweep on Sundays or something like that. And I remember being like, well, why not? You know what I mean?
Well,
Granny was
sweep outside. You don't sweep out the door after dark or something.
Something like that. Yeah. And I remember Granny enforced that. Like she was like, you can't sleep now. You got to get up in the morning and do it. I'm like, what? And she was like, I finally asked her, why is that? And she was like, well, back in the day, the Klan used to come around and, you had to be indoors. And I'm like, okay. And for that time and space, hey, I completely understand. That was a great reason to do that. But times have changed a little bit. I think we can do things a little different now. So that's one example of those kind of, hey, we can maybe switch this up a little bit.
Yeah, it's just habits. Habits are hard to break. And sometimes even when they don't make sense or add up to you, you just think, I always done it. Yeah. It almost becomes a superstition. As an athlete, I know I have my little superstitions. And so you do certain things and you just do it because you were successful at one point. And you look back over your day or leading up to that point and you say, okay, these are the things I did. I need to keep that routine. I need to keep doing that because, I think that's what made me successful at that point. Yeah. And so you just develop these superstitions and these habits that you continue doing even when they don't necessarily mean much or even work.
Yeah. I think this next point I want to make, or a question I want to ask, however you want to look at it, it's tough to visualize or even conceptualize because I think it's all right. Let me just ask it. So can you ever truly be yourself given societal expectations and social norms? And what I mean by that is obviously you've grown up in the US your whole life. I've grown up in the US my whole life. There are ways of doing things in the United States or in Southern California, even more general or more specific, that just have become a part of us. Right. Mm-hmm. But there are obviously people who are born and it's just like, they're out there, they're way different than everyone else. And so it's like, can they ever truly be themselves given the social norms of, where you grow up and the societal expectations? Like for one example is education, right? We talked about, if you're 15 years old, not everyone wants to go to high school or feels that that's who they are as to get educated. That may not be them at all. And I guess you can kind of drop out, but as we know, societal expectations tell you go to school till you're 18 at the very least. But can you really ever follow your own heart and be true to yourself given some of the societal expectations and norms?
Yeah, I think you can. I think those societal expectations help you to begin to see yourself. These are the things I like. These are the things I don't like. And you begin to learn more about who you are. Until you have those experiences, you don't really know what you like, what you don't like, because you've never experienced it. No. So I think absolutely you can become truly authentic to yourself. And that's part of your growing and maturing is learning that through the experiences that you have, the expectations on society. Some of them may be extreme. Some of them may make sense. Some of them may not make sense at all. But I think that's how you begin to develop and learn yourself and become true to who you are. And as you get older, you see people are more like, look, this is who I am. Yeah. The older you get, the less you're thinking about what somebody else said. You're just like, well, that ain't got nothing to do with me. And your mom and I always have this, running joke that, once I hit a certain age, she said, I don't want you to be one of them old men wearing your sandals with your black socks going all the way up. This old dude just grow up and you look at him and you're like, this dude does not care. he
you
good.
On your way. You on your way.
So you just gotta like, this is who I am. I'm comfortable with it. And what everybody else think really don't matter. Yeah. And so I think those norms, those expectations help to shape you to figure out who you are. Because you come here not necessarily knowing who you are, and you learn that over time throughout your journey and your process.
And it's funny because as I wrote or as I thought about that question, I was like, I had the same response. I was like, yeah, you can always find a way to be yourself. But I do think it makes it a lot more difficult when there is kind of more strict societal expectations and social norms around you. I think it becomes one of those things. I think in the long term, a lot of people end up figuring it out, but it may be way down the road as opposed to when you're 14, 15-year-old. Like, for example, I had, luckily you were different and you raised me to, hey, you find what you're passionate about and then you make money doing that, or you find a way to make a living doing that. Whereas I think, in a lot of households, it's a lot different. You're going to go to college and you're going to major in something that is going to make you some money. You know what I mean? You're not, no, this has to make sense. And that can be tough for a lot of people. And I think a lot of kids, I know kids in college that I went to college with, that was like, they hated their major. They hated doing what they were doing. And I was talking to them like, they're going to be miserable doing the job that they get. And I'm like, this don't sound like it at all. And I can just see it now that, 10 years, 15 years down the road, if they didn't been in the job 4 years, they may sit there and say, I hate this. But because of the societal expectations and norms that were placed on them at a young age, it made it so much more difficult for them to be true to themselves, in the long run. But like you said, I do think it's possible. It just may take longer. Well,
not only that, it takes courage to be yourself, because sometimes being yourself may be so different that people look at you as an oddball. Mm. And, you have to have courage to say, you know what, regardless of what other people think, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. As long as I'm not hurting others, I'm okay. Yeah. And so that's a part of it too, is having the courage, even when your parents or someone says you should be going in a direction and it's not something you want. It takes courage to go against, somebody who's raised you, took care of you, and say, hey, you know what, Dad, Mom, I don't want to do that. This is what I want to do. You go from being, and I've seen people who've had high paying jobs as far as professionals, doctors, lawyers, and just say, you know what, I want to go be a painter. In fact, about 20 years ago, I went to New York when I was in school at UCLA in the urban planning program. And we took a trip to see some of the different communities in New York. And there was these 3 guys that had started their business. I think one was an accountant, one was an attorney, and one was engineer or something. But they loved graffiti. So they really stopped those professions and they started a company doing graffiti, where they would do graffiti for commercials and different type of corporate events in which they were able to make a living. But what I'm saying is that they went through the process and they did what everybody expected them to do. And then ultimately their love and their heart was in doing graffiti. Now, I don't know what they're doing now, but it was just something I thought was pretty cool and unique to say, like, wow, you just stepped away from something you spent probably a lot of time, energy, and money obtaining to do something that you love. And you got to be willing to accept what comes with that too. Sometimes it don't always come and work out the way that you would hope or think it would. But if you're happy and passionate about what you do, I think, they work themselves out.
One of the interesting things you said just then in all of that was, as long as you're not hurting anybody, right? Mm-hmm. That seems to be the you kind of do what you want, be who you are, as long as it's not hurting anybody. But I think that line, not hurting anybody, can be taken, that can be a bit of a slippery slope in terms of the way people can view it. And so the question I had is, where's the line of being a good person, within our society and with our community, and making sure you're doing, I guess, your societal duties, and then being true to yourself if, who you are is really not any of that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, for me, if you decide I want to go live in the desert and I can take care of myself, I wasn't asking nobody to pay for it, and I was able to live off the land, you're not hurting anybody. You're not taking anything from anyone. No one has to take care of you. If you can handle that, then to me, I don't think that's a problem. I mean, it's different, but it's not, I don't think it's a problem. I wouldn't have a problem with it. I would probably question, why you want to do it that way. But other than that, if you're good with it and it works, I may disagree with how and why, but at the end of the day, that's your choice.
Okay, well, let's take it a step further. You talked about the guys who do graffiti and they love doing that. What if, there are people who can't stand graffiti. They hate it and it irks them to their core. So going back to that line, as long as you're not hurting anybody, my being says, hey, I love to graffiti big murals on the side of buildings, and I think they're beautiful. And there are probably other people who think they're beautiful. But can I do that? Can I be true to myself in that sense without hurting other people in our society?
Well, they have now in different areas in urban spaces where they allow you to come and paint murals and do those type of things. So I think the two can coexist, and they do. You know, the problem is when you go and you kind of deface someone else's property and they don't want it there and you choose to do it, and now you're crossing the line and hurting someone else or affecting someone else. It may be something you like, but you didn't paint this stuff on my wall. I don't want it there now. I got to have somebody paint it. I got to take time and money to do that. And, you going on doing something else. And so graffiti has, and tagging has added a whole new job, for cities. And it costs probably hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to go in and paint walls in buildings that have been tagged or, defaced with graffiti or what have you. So graffiti is a wonderful thing if you find the time, the space to do it where, it doesn't hurt others.
Yeah. I think it's important to note and talk about those that have been true to themselves, not just in spite of societal norms and expectations, but societal rules. Those that looked at the rules and said, these aren't right. These don't make sense to me. They're not right to my, in a lot of cases to my people, and stood up knowing the consequences. Mm-hmm. I know you said that takes a lot of courage, but I wonder how many of people don't do that or haven't been able to do that because of societal norms, expectations, and rules, haven't been able to ever be true to themselves.
I would say probably 99% of the people. I mean, because there's expectations. And, if many of us do, it's probably when we get to an age to where, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but, you're less likely to go out and do something grand or, that's cutting edge.
Yeah.
So, it's just something I think, and that's what I've always tried to do with you guys, knowing the way that I came up and knowing that, okay, these are the things I want to do and trying to pursue these things, but also having responsibility and obligations. I wanted you guys to be able to say, every day when I get up, I'm living a dream. Every day when I get up, I'm doing something I love to do. And I have that energy, I have that adrenaline. And I feel like, every day I'm playing, it's just like I get up and I go play. Yeah. And to me, your work should feel that way, at least the majority of the time. There'll be days when you feel like, I'm tired, I don't feel like it, but I got to push through. But it's something that you really, really enjoy doing, you're good at, and you're able to sustain yourself doing it.
And I appreciate it because I think I'm a lot like you in the sense that I wouldn't say we lack discipline, but if we don't feel it's something that we're interested in or at least going to benefit us, it's not something we're probably going to give our all to, or at least it's extremely difficult to. And that's the thing is I probably would have gone through, if I had, gone to school to be an accountant and stuff like that. And that's just not what I love doing. And I probably would have been good at it. I would have made some decent money, but I probably would have been miserable every day I woke up and never would have reached my full potential because that's not what I wanted to do. So I appreciate that because that wouldn't have went well for me at all.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been well for me. I'm like, man, you got to go figure that out.
Yeah.
So,
but as we talk about standing for something or falling for anything, I think that obviously fits into this conversation a lot because, when you're talking about being true to yourself, but I want to go back to what we talked about. When being true to yourself is in direct conflict with, I guess, what a lot of other people think or what society tells you the rules are. I know you said courage, and that's the simple answer, right? It's just be brave. But in practicality, how do you stay true to yourself in the face of all of that?
Well, first you gotta look at your values. What are my values? What do I value most? What are those things that I can say if someone came to me and asked me to compromise on this issue? My answer is absolutely no, whatever that may be. There are some things that I say, you know what, they're important. However, I can do without. You know what I mean? That's not something that's a make or break or a deal breaker for me. So I can go with or without, but there are certain things that you have to set your values and your standards and say, no, I don't compromise those. anything under that line, it's up for discussion. I may not change or budge. It all depends on the situation. So you have to understand who you are, and you have to have your value system defined, and knowing that here's the line I don't cross. And over time, as you grow and mature and as you learn more, you may evolve and you may change, but you always want to have a value system so that you know how to gauge if doing something is going to cost you more than what you're willing to pay.
And that's the key. It's funny because as all these, I guess, protests and, the calls for social justice have been going on for the past, few months. One of the quotes that I saw, it's actually kind of like a combination of a few quotes, but it was really interesting to me and said, if it means that much to you, be the change you wish to see in the world or die trying. It's funny because that's a bunch of, but it's true, because if it means that much to you, if your very being tells you that this is incorrect and it's something that you want to fight for, do it regardless of the cost. Because, and then I it's funny because I flipped to this, and I love this line in the Black Panther where he said, I remember T'Challa and Killmonger were going at it, and he finally had, killed him, or he was dying basically. And he said, "Would you like us to save you?" He's like, "No, because you probably just put me in prison anyway." And then he has the quote, I think one of the quote of the centuries in the movie, where he says, what does he say? He said, "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, for they knew death was better than bondage." And I think that's key. And that's key because, like we talk about, being true to yourself, especially in the face of a lot of adversity, you have to understand what's at stake, but understand why that should mean that much to you.
Yeah, I had some experiences, not to that degree, death, but to where I had to challenge myself and I had to challenge others, where I, kind of stood alone. Yeah. And I knew that if I don't make this decision and don't do what I feel is important, and in not compromising my value system, I won't be able to live with myself. Yeah. And that's the thing, is that when you go and you do those things, it's not about what others are going to say and think about you. It's about how do you think and how do you feel about yourself after you made that decision to compromise your value system. And that becomes the challenge, more so than somebody looking upon you negatively. It's like, damn, I let myself down. I did something that I was adamantly opposed to, and I let somebody talk me into doing it. And I've had experiences growing up where I did things that I knew I shouldn't have done, but because others said, let's do it, and you want to try to be, in the cool crowd, you did things. But as I learned, and I said, I don't feel good when I do something that I know is not in my best interest, and I'm doing it because I don't like that feeling, and I like to be able to go home at night, lay down, and feel at peace, and not have those restless nights and things on my mind because I'm not living true to who I am. So for me, it's always being true to who yourself, regardless of what's at stake.
And it's funny because I know we touched on this a little bit last episode, but like we talk about, I think the most successful people, the most happy people in our society are the ones who are being themselves. And a lot of times, the ones that even break those barriers become the most successful and, like I said, the most happy. So it has its benefits.
That's how you on the cutting edge. I mean, the Wright brothers, when they said we want to fly, I bet people looked at them like, I need to lock them up, man. They crazy. But they had a vision, and sometimes when you have a vision and you're the only one see it, you're considered crazy. They said the same thing about, Steve Jobs and all these people who have done things that are cutting edge and that have changed the world. They saw things that other people couldn't see. And the most difficult part about that is that it doesn't come always when you consider it and when you imagine it. You have to work through it. And a lot of times there's failures involved in that. And people look at you and laugh and say, see, I told you that won't go work. But in your mind and in your heart, you're like, I know, I just something about this. Mm-hmm. I got to keep trying until they break through. I've heard a lot of successful people have those stories of many, many failures to the point of giving up. And then they had that one breakthrough to keep them going. And they were able to overcome and, reach the level of success that they were able to reach. But they had to be true to themselves, and they had to look at things and, take those risks and sacrifice to be able to accomplish what they were setting out to accomplish.
Yeah, no, that's That's facts. And that's on a grand scale, right? We're talking about
Right.
changing the world and changing everything, but let's bring it back down to a little bit of a micro scale and just raising your family. Now, I'm not married. I don't have children, but you have done that. You're raising kids and you are married. Talk about being yourself while being, I guess really tied to someone else and in a relationship.
Well, you still got to be true to yourself the same way. You got to know that these are certain things I'm willing to compromise. These are certain things I'm not. But it comes to having that mirror posed at your face, and you can see things and learn a lot about yourself by being in such a close relationship with someone else, particularly marriage. Because, over the years, you get that mirror held up to your face and say, this is what you look like. Do you like what that looks like? Do you like what you see in the mirror? And sometimes it ain't pretty. And you look at it like, hey, I'm kind of jacked up. But at the same time, you got to be willing to grow and not be so stubborn to the point of where it's like, you know what? Nobody's going to tell me what to do. And that happens on both sides. You and your mom and I, we have those days where, we hold those mirrors up. And sometimes it ain't pretty. Sometimes, hey, you ain't who you thought you were. You know what I mean? Like, I look like that. And so if you are concerned and considerate and loving of your spouse, then you'll be willing to make those changes and make those adaptations because it's important. It's not easy because, you just kind of grow up and at 20, 21 to 23, 24, 25, or however old, you have developed idea of who you are, these habits that you have, and now someone else is kind of showing you, let's reconsider that. Yeah. And that's happening on the other side as well. So it's a struggle, but it allows you to learn more about yourself and allows you to evolve and grow if you're willing to do that. And it's ongoing. I mean, even when you get to, my age, we still have things that we probably thought about from day one that we still fight about, that we just like, we ain't figured out how to get past some of this stuff. Yeah. And so, but that's part of the journey, that's part of the growth and development. And if you're willing to hang in there, it's worth it. So,
and I know, so I think I can get behind that idea of, hey, we compromise on certain things. I may kind of, not change my values, but just try to understand where you're coming from. And even on certain things, we may be able to agree to disagree, and that be that what it is. But I think, and I don't know, but as you start to have kids, that's got to be an interesting one, because it's like, now what are we instilling in our children if we don't agree on this topic ourselves?
Yeah, we've had those discussions. Well, I think up to this point, we've done pretty good. I mean, I think you guys came out all right. So we've had some things in which we disagreed upon, and we just sat down and we said, okay, I know we don't agree wholeheartedly on this, but if we were to go in this direction, what is it going to hurt? I know you feel a certain way about it, and we just have to look at, okay, if it's not going to cause any damage, I may not think that that's the best way of doing it, but if it's not going to cause any harm, then you know what, let's go in that direction, because it's something that at least is not going to hurt, and so you just have to really sit down and make those decisions together. And, they're not always easy. And, that's why getting someone that first you love, because you got to be committed. If you don't love them, you'll be out the door real quick. It's a lot of work. I mean, marriage is work. Like I said, even when it's somebody that you love and you really care about, because you're both growing and you're evolving and you're changing, and your dynamics around you are changing, jobs and children. So when you two first come together, it's just you two. Now you throw a kid in there, now you got a whole nother person that's in that relationship. And you throw three of them in there, you got three people in your relationship, not to mention, your surrounding family and all those things. So just being committed and knowing, okay, I'm willing to make whatever the changes that I need to make without compromising my values and who I am. And typically you wouldn't get with someone who would have caused you to compromise your values. They may, stretch you to grow and evolve and improve, but, not someone that will cause you to change who you are, as a person in general.
Yeah. I think that's a good one, man. It's funny. I think it's weird because the past, I would say even week or so, I've always had this quote in my head, but it's been reoccurring in my head over the past week. And it's crazy because when we were presented with this topic, I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. For the last about week or so, I've had this, it's a small quote, but it's something that I've always thought about. Is be unapologetically you. Real simple, but it's just something that's been on my mind. So I guess those are the last words I'll leave them with.
Yeah, well, being unapologetically you is increasingly important. And I always tell people, I don't care how messed up I may be or how great I may be, there's nobody who can do me better than you. So just do
Well,
you.
words to live by. So we appreciate you guys for joining us for another episode of No Strangers to the Game. Today we talked about a lot, being yourself, learning how to be yourself regardless of the circumstances. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified every time we post a video.